What is up, guys? Wisdom for the Wayward Soul here, and I am your host of my brand new podcast, Learning Lenormand. I'm super excited to bring this to you guys, and I hope that this is going to help you learn Lenormand quickly, efficiently, and with confidence. So, with that being said, let's get into it with my first topic, the very basis of Lenormand, in my opinion, polarities. And what is a polarity? So these polarities are the general energies that these cards holds. So you have a negative, a positive, and a neutral polarity. And every single one of these cards have a polarity. Now, what does that mean for you as the reader? Well, these polarities can help you establish whether or not this card is a sign of good fortune, positivity, if it's a sign of negativity, or if it's something neutral that needs to be determined by the situation, the circumstances, and the cards around it. A lot of times, Lenormand is best read in a very omnidirectional way. So if you're doing a small spread, you want to read the cards with the cards around it if you're looking at a neutral card. If you're reading in the form of a grand tableau, which we'll cover later in the series, it's going to be about the house and the placement of that card and how those energies combine and interact with one another. Which makes things very cool because, in essence, the very principle of Lenormand is not only covering these topics, but more importantly, how these energies mix and intermingle. It is a fantastic opportunity to check out just the dynamics of energy and how those flow not only through us, but through every situation in everyday life. Now, positive and negative polarities are honestly pretty easy to understand. When you think positive, the things that are associated with positivity are what comes to mind. This idea of abundance, this idea of general good fortune, something that'll positively impact you. When you think of a negative polarity, it's this idea of a barrier, a lesson, a learning experience, or a problem that might be impacting you if you're reading yourself, or your sitter if you're doing this for a client. Neutral energies, however, is where it gets tricky. These energies are more of a state of being. They're not necessarily positive or negative. But this is what makes them very, very tricky. Because they're not necessarily positive or negative, they can be very easily influenced by the other cards that are either in the placement or the house that you're reading them in the grand tableau, or the cards around them if you're doing a spread. For instance, the house card, which is a neutral polarity, is very much about domestic life. It's about home life, exactly what you think of when you think of a house. Home, family, security, domestic affairs. That in itself doesn't really have a meaning. Those are just topics and subject matters. But if you were to pull that with a card, say the fox, it could turn that house card into something that has a very negative connotation. The idea that maybe that security is false security, that perhaps somebody within our immediate home life is either plotting against us or doesn't have our best interests in mind. But it is important to make the distinction that these positive and negative cards don't change the neutrality of the neutral polarity cards. They simply change the way that energy is filtered and expressed. So we now have a neutral energy that's being expressed through the lens of a negative polarity. It's very important to remember that when you're getting these messages in the Lenormand, you're not changing the polarities of the cards. You are looking at the way that the energies interact. You're looking at the way these energies merged. The Lenormand is a series of merged energies to create new messages. And it's so important that we understand polarities because they play a massive role in reading the Lenormand, so much so that I did the math just so you don't have to. And I broke down the exact percentages of the positive, neutral, and negative polarities in the deck. There's 11 positive polarity cards, which sits at exactly 30.5%, or since we're rounding to whole numbers, 31% of the deck are positive polarity cards. There is 16 neutral cards, which is relatively 44%, and then there's 9 negative cards, which is exactly 25%. Now, it does show to some degree that there is more positive polarity cards in there, as the negative polarity cards are more meant to be lessons or barriers. They're not meant to necessarily hold us back or destroy us. And I feel like that is why they're represented in such a short few amount. But the neutral cards, the neutral polarity cards, which hold the highest value and percentage of cards in the deck, is at 44%. So when we look at that, we know that we're going to have to do some detective work. We're going to have to read with reasonable intuition, and we're going to have to understand how these polarities interact with one another. The neutral polarity cards are absolutely wild cards, and depending on whether or not you get a positive or a negative card in that polarity, it's going to change the ratio of how many positive and negative cards are in that deck, not individually, but once you put those messages together. You're going to end up with a house card that might be negative, a tree card that might be overwhelmingly positive, a tower card that may have damning messages associated with it. And we need to make sure that as the reader, we're prepared to discern these energies and apply them to the reader's life. We have to remember that it is especially important with the Lenormand, and it is important with other reading systems as well, but especially with the Lenormand, we have to remember to be ethical readers. You don't want to jump the gun. You want to think about the Lenormand. It's meant to be taken very literally. So not only do you want to bring this intuitive aspect in when you're reading the Lenormand, but you want to meld that with what you know about the system. It's very important. Lenormand is very literal. It's very traditionally literal. So the Fox card, for instance, is not a card about spiritual gifts. It's not a card about being, cunning and that being a positive influence in your life. This deck, this system of reading, was made during a time period where foxes destroyed livelihoods. If that fox gets in, all your chickens are gone. It is a taker of abundance, and it's one that can sneak up on you. It is an overwhelmingly negative polarity card, and we have to know how that energy interacts, both when we're looking at it in the place of a neutral polarity card and when we're looking at it in the place of a positive polarity card. Does that positive energy offset the negative polarity? Does the neutral energy sit in a place that is integral to that person's life? These are decisions that we have to make intuitively, and we have to make not only as we grow our knowledge of Lenormand, but as we grow our knowledge of the client as we're reading for them. The Lenormand almost demands that you get to know someone because the cards touch on such intimate details of someone's life. So we have to read the Lenormand very responsibly, and we have to make sure we know what we're doing. And I know I hit you with quite a bit of information, and I purposely made it a little vague since we're only talking about the energies and these topics here. But further along in the videos, I'm going to show you examples of actual cards and how these polarities are going to interact within these cards. And when you understand the meaning, you will understand why that polarity has been assigned to that card. But this has just been a general breakdown of polarities just for the public. If you would like to go more in depth with polarities, check out my private coaching sessions, and we can definitely cover that more in depth. If you have any questions about polarities, put them down in the comments below, and I will try to answer them the best I can. If it's something I can answer in a comment, I'll put a comment there. If it's something that demands a video, I will make a separate YouTube video just for your comment. But ultimately, I think this is a sufficient introduction to polarities, and I'm so excited for you to get to learn more about the polarities and how they affect specific cards as we get further into the podcast. But I hope that you have a great morning, evening, or night. The goal of this podcast is going to be to get these new episodes out every Friday. But I wish you all a fantastic morning, evening, or night, wherever you are and whatever time it is when you're listening to this video. And I wish you the best of luck in your Lenormand endeavors.